Welcome to another episode of the Commuters, and today Spencer has recommended a very spicy movie. Spencer, do you want to say what it was?
I want to leave now for that joke.
I
That
hate
joke
I
alone.
hate it. You've offended both of us.
I'm gonna sacrifice you to the spice worms.
Yeah,
The
well,
spice.
No,
the spice is the spice, and the worms are the worms.
the worms are their
Are
money.
the spice are the worms. The worms are the spice.
we
Fear
are
is the
all the
mind
spice
killer.
inside, but we're also the
Mhm.
worms inside.
Oh boy.
Also, we all can go to the place, but only the man can go there because the women couldn't go to that place because of the worms.
Of course.
What?
What?
What? Can we?
Anyways,
What?
Spencer, what was the movie again?
The movie was Dune, which is based off of the novel of the same name by Frank Herbert. This one was made in 1984,
Yep.
you
Mhm.
said?
Yep.
Yeah.
Spot on. Good job. Do you know
Was,
who directed it?
I do not. Who
You
directed it?
didn't see his name at the beginning? David Lynch directed this film. David
Really?
Lynch. Obviously of what is it, Twin Peaks fame, or you could
Yeah,
say
that's where
Social
I know him
Network
from.
fame, or many other high-profile films that are considered some of the better ones or whatever.
Isn't Twin Peaks a series and not a film? Or was there
Yeah,
those two?
I've heard of both of those.
All
I
right.
think my favorite David Lynch is probably Eraserhead.
Yeah, I
Oh,
hear a
yeah.
lot of people bring up Eraserhead as their favorite, so I feel that.
The other thing that I thought was very interesting, and before we get into the complex discussion about this film, because I think there's a lot to say, but the people who did the music for this movie was the band, or is it a band? Toto. Toto did the music.
Wait, really?
Really?
Wait.
Yep.
That explains why I felt the music was probably one of the best parts of the movie. It's very catchy.
Yeah, I
I know
actually like the music a lot.
Brian Eno also did a lot of composing for the score.
Ooh.
Mm.
I
But,
had another comment to back off that real quick. It's
Mhm.
actually entirely plausible Spencer didn't know who directed it, because if you heard about did you ever read into that a little bit?
No.
Some of the copies when the movie was being run on certain platforms, and when it was re-released, David Lynch's name actually was removed and a different name was put in place of it.
Huh.
Really?
Because it was actually it was supposed to be like a stand-in name, because he wanted to kind of distance himself from the film after it came out.
Wow.
It's because he didn't like the way. So this is like just before we even talk about the film itself. But apparently the executives and a lot of like creative differences were being had. So he didn't feel like what he had at the end of the day was his vision. So he didn't really want to say it was even his anymore.
Yeah, and I know that having read the books, the movie is definitively different. The main framework of the story with the whole Atreides family and Paul is still the same, but there are a lot of significant differences
Okay.
between
Well-
the film and novel adaptation.
If I may, I actually know a good spot to kind of kick off kind of our discussion. I was thinking what better part to start than the beginning, because so the film opens with a single close-up of this woman's face explaining to you how the world works. And I have a few different feelings about this. One, I think this is one of the first cases where and she kind of sounds like Kate Blanchett in the opening of Lord of the Rings. Like, I get heavy of those vibes. So this is kind of one of the first cases I think where they kind of do that with they have this lady who she's got a very, I don't know, almost magical feel to what's going on and explaining the world. That being
Right.
said, this starts with one of my biggest issues with the film overall. And I know this is a budgetary thing, and a lot of my issues are going to fall under they could not afford to do this scope. It's the aspect of tell don't show that they went with, where a lot of this is like I was thinking and comparing it to the Lord of the Rings opening, where you have this monologue. In Lord of the Rings, they show you everything she's talking about. In this, she just looks right at the audience. It's almost like a stage play, and explains to
Yeah.
you what's going on.
I
Which is
See, in
actually-
the version that I watched, and I can forward it to you guys later, they have a small slideshow going through the narration as it's narrated. I want to say by I'd have to look into who it was narrated by, but it's an older gentleman who narrates
Oh,
the world and
really?
background of it.
All right,
Yeah.
because I watched the same version as Basil, and my first reaction was, all right, real talk. I am someone who despises when you just use vocabulary and just start layering it on top of me. This is one of the first things that like turned me off. I'm gonna be honest, by the way, before we even go too far, I didn't enjoy it that much. I like a lot. There's going to be good things about this, but I was very turned off by having like a bunch of vocabulary just dropped in my head at the very beginning of the film, and it took me like I'd say about half an hour to be like, okay, I'm getting what you're putting down now. But
Yeah. It's one of those movies where you really, really, if you want to like put names to faces and know all of the terminology, you got to be writing it down as it goes. You
yeah,
know, I feel my heart goes out to anyone who saw this movie in theaters back in 1984 who had read the books and didn't know anything about Dune.
Yeah.
because
Oh my
yeah,
God.
oh,
I
like,
don't think most American audiences could even pronounce Kwisatz Haderach.
Oh
dude,
my gosh.
dude, half of the words in this film, I'm like the wahoo. It took me a bit to like adjust to it. I will say though, I don't want to like go too deep before we like because we're still talking about the opening, but I will say a lot of great concepts, and this does make me wish I read the book because I
Well,
was
remember,
like,
Sky, that sometimes traveling so deep, you don't see markers.
thank you, Spencer.
Well, the other thing, and you mentioned the book, Sky. This actually did inspire me to read the book because I was
Yeah,
like, you know what? I can see underneath this that there's actually a very like interesting world and story and universe there, but it's the film only scratches the surface, and I think like the opening is kind of exemplary of that. And I feel like once again, and a lot of my issues are going to come down to budgetary limits. And I think when they made it, you know, they clearly didn't have their scope. They bit off more than they could chew. They wanted to make this giant epic film, but they just didn't have the means and or technology to do so.
yeah.
So that was kind of an issue. A lot of the issues come from their scope being a little bit too big to what they could either afford or what they had the technology to do at the time.
Hmm.
And we'll get into some of the effects later because I think there's a lot to say
Oh
about
boy.
those. But
Uh, I actually,
um,
I will say, like, all things considered, while we were just complaining about, like, or while I was just complaining about vocabulary, and you're absolutely right. I noticed that with the budget is like certain effects. I was like, this is 1984. This seems a little, this seems like it's a little like outdated, which I was very surprised by. Mind you, I actually like their sets a lot. Their sets and costume design like are really good. I never
Oh,
felt
yeah.
like I was turned off by the way things looked. And interesting enough, a lot of the grotesque like stuff is actually very like pleasant.
well done.
It's
Yeah,
well done.
it is. That's something that like I will say is while definitely effects are cheap, they did not skimp on everything else. You can definitely tell that like, and the cast is great too. So,
Oh yeah.
but we can talk about that as we get once we actually talk about the story.
Spencer, do you want to give like a rough outline of what the story is for
Wait,
those who
wait.
aren't too
I have a great idea.
Huh?
How about I attempt it, and then I want to see how close I was, because
Oh,
I don't.
actually that's a good idea.
All
I
right,
love that.
all right, all right, all right. So, from what I could gist, there are two different groups. There's like an empire sort of establishment, not quite, but the main antagonist of that group is actually a baron. And then you got the main protagonist family, and there's something along the lines of someone bore, or the one woman bore a child who was supposed to be this sort of super soldier prophecy kind of kid, and a lot of people doubt it because he's just kind of not what they were expecting. And both of these two like families care a lot about this thing called the spice, which is like on this planet called Arrakis, and it's really important to space travel and all that. And that's the main conflict, is what's going on Arrakis. And eventually there's a lot of like intrigue that happens, and you find out there's a traitor amongst I won't lie, I forgot the names of the two families because they just I know one of them is Harkonnen, right? That's the bad
Yes.
boys.
There's Atreides and
Atreides.
Harkonnen.
All right, Atreides are the good, the Harkonnen are the bad, right?
Yep.
Like, all right. So they go through all that, and then eventually, the Duke of you literally just said them, and I already
Atreides.
Atreides.
Mm-hmm.
The Duke of Atreides is killed in the process of this like raid that happens essentially on the location that they have control of on Arrakis, and then that leads to the son and the mother getting not ostracized. That's the wrong word. Getting separated, and they end up hanging out with the indigenous people essentially who have lived on Arrakis for a while, and they got cool blue eyes. And I don't fully understand that still because, and then
It's the spice.
the spice, right? Anyway, that goes through. There's eventually a conflict, and then they kill the Baron, and they take Arrakis back after what happened. But it takes place. But apparently, we have a time skip of 2 years, which really surprised me and confused me at the same time. Then at the end, they're like, all right, the son is actually a super crazy psychic powered warrior because he was the chosen one, and he essentially becomes a messiah. And the movie ends after a cool knife fight, and he makes it rain again on Arrakis. How'd I do?
You got the basic plot of the movie down pat. Like you understood the movie. Just some of the background stuff and like the politics was a little off, but that's okay because they don't, like you guys said, and like I will definitely admit, they don't do the best job of wrapping you guys up in the 10,000 years of history in Dune.
Yeah. That was the thing right away that struck me is she's like, oh, the year is 10,000 something something. I'm like, dang, that's pretty far into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, cool, dude.
The biggest corrections that I have to make are that the universe is ruled in a feudal government state by all of these great houses, basically. Okay. All of these houses belong to the same conglomerate group. It's like the Lansadek or something, but it's basically
or something.
Yeah, the Lansads. They're a house of representatives or a congress of all of the leaders of these great houses who rule smaller subject provinces of the known universe, all of them underneath the Padishah Emperor, who at the time of Dune is Saddam IV.
Okay, alright. Okay.
And the two families that we follow, they aren't the only families, but for the purposes of Dune, they're the only ones that matter. Atreides and Harkonnen.
Yeah, because there was more families, but they're the only ones that play a part really in this story. Also, and this is some background I've been getting from reading the book, apparently it's like the way the universe is set up is kind of like a tri-government system in the sense that you have the government of the empire in the imperial government, then you have the houses, and then you have the spacing guild.
Yep, and the guild navigators tie in directly to the spice, because the only way that ships in the universe of Dune are able to travel back and forth is that they have people who are so like forcibly evolved and mutated from the spice. You see them wheel one of them out in a fish tank in the beginning of the movie, and he yells at the Emperor.
Is that what that thing is?
Yeah, that's a human. That's a human that's been on spice for 400 years, and they basically are able to warp space and time around those big cylindrical ships and move them around the universe without actually having a propulsion system.
Dang.
What the fuck? I don't feel like I got that at all.
I thought those were aliens.
Yeah, I thought they were aliens. I didn't know that was a human. I just thought it had something to... What?
Yeah, that's a people. Because in the movie, he directly references it once, and only once, by saying, the spices kept me alive for 4,000 years, and it's extended your life 200. So spice basically just keeps people immortal forever, but it also is fatal if you stop taking it. And everybody is on spice, all of the dukes and lords of everywhere. which is why spice is so important. Because in a universe-wide government system where all of the elite upper crust powerful people are addicted to a drug that's fatal if you stop taking it, there's only one planet that makes it.
Okay. That helps a lot, because I understood why the spice was important to a degree. I understood for
Right.
space travel. I was like, conceptually, that immediately made sense. It's a power struggle for a very important resource. Essentially, an unobtainium that is like the
Yeah,
end all be all.
it's the MacGuffin, if you will, of the story is the spice. And I to me it wasn't that, like, I was satisfied with the explanation the movie gave about spice. I'm like, okay, so it's
Yeah.
a super important drug that, like, they were like, it expands your mind and extends your life or whatever, and everybody needs it. And that's enough for me with regarding that.
Yeah.
Right.
I did like there's a couple of like wordplay things, and I know this is from the book, but I was like, oh, Herbert thought he was real clever by calling the people who lived on the planet, who weren't associated with the Empire or the Guild, the natives or whatever, the Fremen. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, kind of almost sounds like free man.
Exactly.
Ha ha.
I was like, oh, that clever little Herbert there.
Uh,
I like that actually though.
all right. Well, regardless, we've talked about the story a lot though, so like, I'm glad that does like clear up some things for me, like, because I was wondering what the guild had to do with anything. I was like, I definitely feel this is a situation where I kind of wish I had more time with this universe rather than being like dropped in and essentially
You know
being
what-
told how it works.
You know what Dune would lend itself really, really well to, I think,
A
is
TV series as opposed to like a
yeah,
movie?
yeah,
Oh yeah,
an
like a
HBO
Netflix or
style.
something, or HBO.
Yeah, if they could I think Dune would be a better Game of Thrones than Game of Thrones
Yeah,
if they put the money behind it.
I could see
yeah.
that.
I mean, well, here's hoping that, because I know with these new movies for Dune, they're doing it in two parts, but also supposedly they're doing a series after these movies that's like with the same actors, which I can't imagine that being totally possible because some of these actors are high profile. So
Oh yeah,
that being said, let's talk about some of the actors of this film and how they did, because for me, I've been watching a ton of Star Trek, so I almost like I had a tear of joy when Patrick Stewart just showed up.
oh yeah.
I was like, oh dang, it's Patty, it's good old Patty boy. But I thought that everybody actually did a very good job, and I think that's a testament to David Lynch as a director of actors. Like, he's a good director. He knows how to get good performances out of actors. And I thought that, like, a
Yeah.
few standouts for me was, I thought that the mother actress, I thought she did really good.
Francesca Annis, I believe.
Yep.
I actually pulled up the cast list this time because this seems very important, because in this case, yeah, the cast is very good.
Yeah, and I thought that who was it? Well, there was Sting was in this. I was
Yep.
like, what, Sting?
There's a really cool interview from Patrick Stewart talking about his time on set and how at that time he wasn't at all involved with contemporary music, so he didn't know who Sting was.
Oh,
thought
that's hilarious.
He thought Sting was just like a guy that he heard played music.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. I'm not gonna.
Oh, also, Wormtongue was in this.
What?
Who was he?
He was the Mentat dude who was kind of like the advisor to the Baron.
Mm-hmm.
So he pretty much
Wow.
played the exact same position.
I can't believe that was Wormtongue.
Oh yeah,
That's kind
with
of
like
nutty.
those crazy eyebrows and stuff. And then like he wants like the Jessica or whatever. Like he wants her.
Indeed.
And then yeah, that was something. Yeah, I just thought overall it was well acted. I think unfortunately, because of the time constraints of like trying to capture this huge story, that a lot of actors or characters didn't get that much to say or do.
Yeah.
The one
Yeah.
who I think of specifically is Shani or Chani, however her name's pronounced.
Yeah,
She,
Shawnee.
I feel like she was kind of underserved, like, as a character.
You mean
She
the
doesn't-
fact that she appears and is a love interest almost immediately, and you the viewer are given no time to comprehend this relationship that forms.
That's so
Yeah,
sad too, because they have such a cool way of going about her character in the book, and she has so much interesting interplay with Paul Muad'Dib.
yeah,
Because at that point he'd already, renounced his birthright as an Atreides and became a freeman. But I
yeah,
think that kind of goes into the main thing that I really have to talk about outside of just how they dealt with the story in general, Frank Herbert. I think Dune is really best appreciated and viewed when you look at it as a symbolic piece of literature and not something that you take literally and try and glean entertainment off as a story. Dune's more of a message
yeah,
because Frank Herbert was really, really passionate about environmentalism, and that's a pretty prevalent theme, I think, even in the movie. The idea of, these various noble houses and powers moving into Arrakis and vying for control of it while the native people and resources are pulled around with the
yeah.
power struggle.
Yeah.
I also saw it as like, I mean, if we're talking themes, and the themes that I think hold up in the movie are mostly against like, imperial power and like overbearing governments, and it's more so in the book. It adds like, I don't think they really did a good job of showing the also like the corporate side of it in the movie, because like in the
Yeah,
book so far that I've been reading, like there's the company of the Spacing Guild and stuff like that's a huge deal, and in the movie they kind of have it, but it's more, you're more so what you see is like the imperial government control, where there's also that third pillar or whatever of their government, which is the company.
right.
um
And the Spacing Guild is unironically more powerful than the Imperial government.
yeah, because
You
they
know,
need them to get anywhere, and they
exactly.
have a
With all those,
monopoly.
they were also the most reliant on spice, though, which is why they were so involved. Which,
Exactly.
like you guys said, they don't talk about it in the movie, which sucks because they had the biggest stake in what happens to Dune. That's why immediately we see one of these 4,000-year-old navigators get wheeled in a vat of clear jello and just
Like,
yells at the Emperor like a little kid that says, "Hey, Paul Atreides, kill this kid. We don't like him. He's gonna ruin things."
Yeah.
yeah,
The Emperor the
I'm
Emperor has to go reference things and go, "Who?"
He's like, surely you mean the Baron, not his son. He's like, come on.
I
It is. There's a lot going on there with the themes, and I think you can have like, because like, this, the type of things that this probably would gets compared to. I think it's been compared to stuff like Lord of the Rings and other kind of like epic, like huge stories that also like have very deep ingrained themes.
That's a great point that I want to touch upon later as well.
Where
After
I
you,
feel like this story can be translated to film in a very successful way, and I really do hope that Denis Villeneuve can pull it off with the movies
mm,
coming out supposedly this year, unless they get delayed. But
that cast list has me very, very happy.
yeah, who is it? It's they have Timothy Chalamet to play as the kid, Rebecca Ferguson as his mom, as Jessica. They have as Duke Leto, Oscar Isaac, and then
Yep.
as the monster or whatever, the beast, that character in the movie who like eats a cow's ear or whatever, just rips it off. They got what's his name? Drax. I can think of who he plays as, but
Batista,
Batista.
John
yeah.
Batista, or
And then Josh Brolin is gonna play as Chris or Patrick Stewart's character. Who
Would have been
else?
great if they got Patrick Stewart back.
Yeah. Well, they could make him play as like somebody, as like the Emperor, or at this point he could just play as one of those spacing mutants because he's that old.
Very true. They wheel him out.
But back to this movie, not to derail us too much from the topic at hand. I do. I think now we could kind of talk about the effects, because I think there's a lot to be said about. There's some effects,
Hold on.
and I'm not gonna lie, and I don't want to be too mean because I know this is the '80s and they were doing the best they could.
They looked
But
bad
I
even for the
laughed.
80s. Yeah.
I laughed at quite a few
All right,
effects.
all right.
Specifically, the one that comes to mind, and I just want to mention it real quick, is when they go to the worms, and then he sticks his shovel into the side of the worm, and then he kind of rides that up the worm, and
Yup.
it's not good
Oh,
looking.
I
could do something better.
I was thinking, I thought you were gonna start with the first like big effect of the movie, which is when they turn on their weird shields, and I was like, what is happening?
Yeah,
What is
that's what I
happening?
was thinking.
Yeah, the moment I saw those, I was like, what am I watching? I don't
'Cause
understand.
It obscures things so hard.
It obscures
That,
things. I don't understand how it works, because it just is a thing that they do all of a sudden. Except then they
Yeah.
kind of tell you what it does when you realize that physical objects can pass through it. It's
Yeah,
like,
but they have to go slowly.
yeah.
Right? That's why they fight with knives instead of like when they're using those shields, because a gun would be pointless because the bullets just bounce off, or whatever
Exactly.
lasers. Because they said with the shields you have to fight, like you to kill you have to go slowly, or at least that's what I got from what I saw.
And there's a whole metaphor in the little personal shield they have, and the way that Paul Atreides goes about dismantling the Harkonnen occupation on his planet. There's a whole like linked duality that I think he just put in those small shields as a technology so that he could allude to the way that he broke down the Harkonnen shield over the course of years of guerrilla warfare and training himself up.
Too bad. I feel like that metaphor is lost completely in the film, because that
It
2
is.
years just completely it just happens. Like I
And
said, when they gave
I
us
absolutely
that,
have to say it. In the version that I watched, I don't know how long it is for you guys. Mine was 3 hours. I watched a
Oh, wow.
183-hour movie,
uh,
or 183-minute hour movie. I've never seen a 3-hour film be so strapped for time.
That's man, it because I watched. I think it was what Sky. I think we watched the same version.
Yeah,
I
we
think it was
watched-
2 hours.
yeah, about 2 hours and 14 minutes or so.
Yeah. What was it? So I paused it right after. So they have the whole attack, and then what's his name? The main character Paul and
Paul.
Jessica escape, and then they meet the natives. At that point in the story, there was like 30 or something minutes left in the movie.
45 actually.
Yeah,
I checked
and I was
right
like,
around then.
they spent it at that point in the story. In my head, I'm comparing that to like the part when Frodo arrives at Rivendell, and I'm like, uh-oh. Like in my head it just clicked. I was like, they don't have enough time to tell the rest of the story. They only, and because I thought up to that point the pacing was actually like pretty, like they were giving you information and stuff, and it wasn't too squeezed in, even though I could feel the pressure. But at that point I was like, oh crap, they don't have enough time.
And then it hit the funnel.
Like I one of my number one things I despise in a movie is here's the thing. Time skips are something that are very, very, very dangerous, because you're essentially telling the viewer stuff happened, so we moved forward. And while I understand that was probably like an important moment in the book, I feel books can handle something like a time skip a little better. This movie doesn't care. The movie didn't feel like it cared at all.
Books have the added benefit of a chapter structure. It's not just one long story told from beginning to end. You can have a time skip in between chapters and it seems fine because you are beginning something new.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whereas in a movie, you really have to indicate specifically that no, some time went by. You know?
And it doesn't help that the time skip in this one takes place around, the time skip itself takes place around the 30-minute mark. Like, that's around where it happens, Basil. Like, I know what part you were talking about. So, like, they give you, like, 10 minutes where there's that, and then you hit the time skip, and suddenly Paul is, like... Also, Paul's character is in almost complete, like, 180 by that point in the film, which is something that I was also very taken aback by. I don't feel as though his character grew quite as naturally as he could have, and this is probably a problem because, again, the book has that ability to slowly develop him and not, like, do this 180, now he's a super soldier. He's super psychic. He's so skilled.
Oh, yeah.
He can. I don't feel like I got anything from it.
There was stuff that you could tell they didn't have time to explain. And to me, it was one, like, with the worms. All of a sudden, he knows how to ride a worm. And I'm like, wait, what?
They do
cool, though.
They explain it, but they explain it as being part of the prophecy. He utters... all right. Max von Sydow plays a character named, like, Dr. Lynn, I think it is, or Dr. Kynes. You don't see him very much. He's in the scene where Paul, his father, Leto, and Patrick Stewart's character, Gurney, are all in that ship, and they fly over the spice
Oh
refinery.
yeah,
Yeah.
I remember
Uh,
that guy.
yeah, he had the eyes that were blue and blue, and that's where we're first
Yeah.
introduced to that
Oh my
concept.
gosh, that was Max Fon's. Wow,
Yeah, it
I
was.
didn't
It
recognize.
was when he's checking everyone's suits, and he checks Paul's, and he goes, "Wait, your suit's in desert fashion. How did you know to do this? Who did this for you?" And he was like, "I don't know, just seemed natural." That internal monologue he has at that point, where he recites a line of the prophecy as, oh, how does it go? It's basically like, and he would come and know our practices as if they were his
Yeah.
own. That is supposed to explain every single instance of him breaking the fourth wall and understanding the things that he probably shouldn't have any knowledge of.
I actually want to
Is
talk about that. Real talk. There's something
Really?
about that. There's a lot of monologuing in this film that is very fourth wally. It's very
Oh yeah, so that's
strange.
something Spencer mentioned at the a little like when we were talking before this, and you're ready to kind of get into that then because I think
absolutely, because I that's one of my big points that I want to talk about is the way that they used internal dialogue in this
or
film.
ASMR as I call it,
I
It's-
love
they,
it.
they were
I
all whispering.
I love it, and it's all right. I'm probably biased because it adds more of a feel to the movie like the book was, but really, I love the idea of internal dialogue of characters in film. I think it gives a lot more freedom to express things and have characters seem more dynamic and actually like engaging in things as they happen without having to say it out loud.
yeah.
Because I know that I'm not at what
Well, they are saying it out loud, though. They're just not saying it out loud. Like the movie is
exactly
saying it. The character isn't. They're thinking it.
exactly putting us in that position of a actually omnipotent third party viewer. I think helps a lot.
Yeah. I can
Fair enough.
I
And
can see that.
Yeah, I can see where you're
I like
coming
it as a concept, and I wish more movies did it. I
I'm
think there's
actually-
a lot of
I'm
a lot
probably,
of ways to do it wrong, but
I'm probably gonna be right there with you. Actually, it's actually something I enjoyed a lot. It's kind of it's nice to not have to like infer what someone is thinking or feeling for once, and I felt very much more like I was experiencing something like more. What's the word I'm looking for? I felt as though I had. It wasn't about nuance. It was about like giving you something kind of like almost like Basil. You made the comparison to a stage play early on. That's
Yeah.
kind of the vibe I get, and I really like those internal monologues from time to time. I found myself always like being like, huh, because it was nice to kind of grasp what a character is thinking in their own words. Because some of them talk a little, certain characters have their own kind of like dialect on how they perceive things.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to like Paul's, for example, are some of the more interesting ones. His internal monologues, especially during stuff like when his hand was quote unquote being burned. Yeah, stuff like that. The mind killer line, being something I'm probably gonna reference that from once in a while because I really like that line. It's interesting. But
I'm so
Yeah.
glad too because now you guys are going to get all my Dune references. I don't throw them out there because, like Basil said, it's one of those movies that I think everyone's heard of a little,
Yeah.
either the books or the movies, but very few people have taken the time to watch it.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to give my opinion about the inner monologues because this is something that I've kind of been holding on to this whole time.
Oh yeah,
But so I am a huge proponent, and this goes back to the beginning of the film. I'm a huge proponent of show don't tell, and as such, I did not like the inner monologues that much at all. I thought the only part that they were appropriate was when he was like that getting his hand burned, but there's a few reasons why. One, I consider it a crutch because most of the time when it limits the actors in my opinion, and it limits sending your message in a way that's more nuanced and more genuine. And I understand the want to make it more like the book, but at a certain point, like this is a different medium. This is film, and when you're adapting to film, you have to take for account that there's certain things that, in my opinion, don't work as well on film. And having every single character have an inner monologue in the movie to me was kind of jarring and annoying. Even if it was just the main character who had an inner monologue, I would have felt a little bit better. But it was almost every character had it at some point.
I
And
would have felt the same way if they were any longer than what they were.
yeah, but also on a more personal level, I found like the whispering very annoying, but that's a more very subjective there. But I just think that it's more impressive to me when I can tell exactly what a character is thinking without having to be told what they're thinking, if that makes sense. And I've seen a lot of movies do it very well, where you can tell from the expression on their face, from very small gestures. I mean, in The Mandalorian, I can tell what he's thinking, and I can't see his face. I can tell what he's thinking by the slightest gestures and movements, or how he's feeling. And that's something that I think good, excellent films, really take to the next level. I don't necessarily think it's necessarily a bad thing in this movie. Like, I think it does come down a lot to personal taste here. But for
I
me
would say,
personally,
oh,
I
go
felt
ahead.
that the monologues were just kind of distracting to me. And
Hmm.
there were parts where I felt they added a little bit, but then there were parts where I felt like they were like, dang it, we need to explain this part of the story. So, just have that character think it. Boom, solved.
I can see your point where it can definitely be used as a crutch. I think definitely to just quickly touch upon the point you made with the Mandalorian, being able to express various things without even emoting facially. I think that works, but only in a setting where the emotions and the context are a lot easier to grasp than something like Dune. Not to be like, oh my, this movie I recommended is super nuanced and big brain. It requires narration, but you can agree that there's not a lot of higher level concepts going on in The Mandalorian.
I think
It's
that's
not like he had much
Well,
input, anyways, other than
yeah,
"Baby
but
Gone."
I just use The Mandalorian as an example. I've seen way more nuanced and complex films that do it
Yeah, yeah.
just fine. I was just using The Mandalorian as like an extreme example.
Hmm.
Maybe I should have used a different example, but
No, it's
I
okay.
I think my point mainly is that I think most of you can infer what people are thinking or feeling, and here's the word, when you're
Hmm.
using an inner monologue for exposition, that's when I don't like it. And there were
Yeah,
parts in this, a lot of the inner monologue in this movie was used for exposition. There were parts, like I said, that I felt that it worked and wasn't used for exposition, like the part Sky mentioned when he has his hand in the box and he's kind of reciting like a strength of will poem in his head, which I was
yeah,
like, that was cool, that was effective, and I think that was a good moment for it. And there was a couple other smaller moments like that where I was like, that's fine. But then there were parts, in a lot of parts, where they just use it for exposition. And I think that
yeah,
was my biggest issue. Because when you're just splurting exposition at me, and I understand, once again, a lot of my issues come down to they had to squash a huge story into it. And I watched a 2 hour version, and you said even the 3 hour felt like it was pressed for time. But
yeah.
they're squashing this huge story, and so they're like, we need to get this information out there, otherwise people won't know anything what's going on. So
Hmm.
I can understand that, but ultimately that comes as a bit of a failing on the movie's end and a bit of a failing on the producer's end of being like, okay, yeah, let that 2 hours is fine for this giant epic story.
Hmm.
I
Which
some part of me thinks that maybe contextually when they were planning to make an adaptation, I don't think they really realized just how dense this universe is and how utterly daunting it actually was. This is like to give this real justice. I feel like this was a situation where if this had been made around the era where we were accepting that you give more time to a bigger story, a la like how certain novelizations were given the benefit of the doubt of being multiple parts, Lord of the Rings,
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. Yeah,
it's like hell. The Hobbit got 3 movies. A tiny book
Right.
got 3 movies, and you couldn't even give Dune, a giant, huge story, more than 1 movie.
I think
Yeah, and
it's a
that's just
prospect of
a
the time.
exactly because back
Well,
then, they
I think,
were. It was all about the blockbuster.
yeah,
Back in the '80s. Coming off of the heels of lots and lots and lots of very classic one-off movies. They just wanted another one, and you can kind of tell with the casting that they wanted to make it carried on the names and the prestige of things
yeah,
versus what they actually delivered.
yeah, for
They
sure.
want they wanted Patrick Stewart and all of the various cast members that they cast. I mean, they put Sting in there.
Yeah,
It's not like
yeah,
Sting did a bad job, but
yeah. He didn't really have
Sting.
a whole lot to do.
Which is just, actually, on that note, I thought his character was going to be this kind of like rival antagonist, and he doesn't do anything for the whole film. That's the vibe I
Yeah,
thought they were going for, because he's got
in
this
the
kind
novel,
of. I was just gonna say he's got like this look about him. He's got that like polar opposite kind of look to the way Paul does, and
exactly, and
you
that's
get that a little
supposed to
bit.
be what he is.
Yeah, you get that a little bit towards the very end of the film with the only time he does anything. And I was like, this feels like such an empty opportunity. It's one of those cases where it's like you definitely feel like this is a movie that deserves to breathe, and it
Hmm.
can't.
Yeah, like that's the thing because I feel like underneath here there's a good movie with these actors, with this director, with like even these effects to an extent. There's a good movie there. It's just
Yeah, I
it
mean, all
didn't get the room it needed to breathe.
like you guys were talking about with the shitty CG. Absolutely. Like back in 1984, the effects of the shields going off, they looked worse than something in Tron.
That's what I was thinking because Star Wars came out before this.
Yeah, but Star Wars was all practical. The only like technically CG, and even then it wasn't, effects that they had were lightsabers or blaster
Yeah,
bolts.
that's true.
Those
They
were
just
done
painted
in
those in the frame.
exactly. That was
Um,
done like a retouching. Inversely, I think that their practical effects, the stuff that they did with the aerial shots of the worms like
yep.
coming out of the sand and
Mhm.
like especially the scene where we're first introduced to the idea of the spice worms of Arrakis, where it
Yep.
swallows the spice like mining platform. Chills every time I see it.
It's yeah, that I was actually going to say that when you mentioned the bad effects. Actually, when we were talking about that, the worms in this, for the most part, were actually very very good looking on their own. Like the way they move
Hmm.
through the sand, even with that kind of cool lightning effect going on. Like I actually thought
Yeah,
that was cool. And then they, like you said, that part that you could tell that was like miniatures or something, but for that mining thing, but it looked really good. You could tell it looked real. It looked convincing, and then you get like this a sense of the scale of the worm because
hmm
you saw how big humans were next to that mining thing. And then you're seeing how big that mining thing is next to the worm, and you're like, dang.
yeah. You see
Um,
it disappear into its mouth like a pizza roll. You're like, wait a
eh,
minute.
but yeah, no, I agree that, and even some like Sky said, some of the sets looked great, and some of the gore effects I thought looked great. A lot of the practical effects just looked fantastic. Really, like when the thing falls is when they're using whatever kind of green screen or CG they had at the time. Whenever they're using that, then you're like, oh goodness. And that's like the growing pains of that technology, right? And even today, we'll see bad CGI and stuff, which is like,
Absolutely.
it's insane that, like, this movie, for its bad looking parts, it still has like this kind of charm in its practical effects that really help elevate it. Whereas like a lot of times you'll see films that just are bad CGI and you're like, gosh, there's no redeeming aspects of the effects.
I wanna backtrack for a sec. There was a comment because I kind of like while we were talking about it, I there was one thing I wanted to throw at the idea of internal monologues just to see what you guys think of this. Did you notice who had internal monologues the most?
Paul?
Paul, yes, but they're usually any character that had an internal monologue or at least stated something from that internal kind of space, it
Hmm.
tend to be someone with some form of I don't want to say psychic like connection or
I
something
was
like
gonna
that.
say, yeah, it
Yeah,
was most of the Bene Gesserit witches that had internal monologues, like that matron mother
yeah.
character, as well as his mother.
Which I actually wonder if that was I get the vibe that was intentional then. That it was intentional for these characters who have some form of link to these higher abilities that are the ones that we the viewer are seeing this kind of like
I
monologue
would
from.
agree,
But
except there are problems. Like, I do
yeah,
agree that those people have most of the inner monologues, but I mean, Dr. Yui's just like a regular doctor, and he has a lot of inner monologuing.
Hmm. Let's touch on that character because I wanted to get your read on the big betrayal bit. Where House Atreides is subverted by the spy in their midst. Did you see it coming that it was the Doctor
yes,
who had the pledge to never take a human life?
absolutely.
You did. I actually didn't really see that coming, who it was. I actually thought it was going to be like Patrick Stewart's character or something, but mostly based on the fact I was like, oh, who is a famous actor who could probably be a good betrayal character? And I was like, oh, Patrick Stewart, but
Hmm.
not really based off story stuff.
I was gonna say there was something about his character that was off. After a certain point in the film, before his betrayal, that I got the vibe there was something not fully there. Yeah, even though he stated that whole, oh, I'm going to, something about it just kind of jived with me in that regard. But I
Yeah.
couldn't really explain it to you.
Well, there was the
Why?
scene with Jessica, and she's like, he's holding something back, or because she's like, oh, his wife died by Harkonnen or something, because he was in the, and then he had like Imperial conditioning, which I'm not sure what that is, but then she was like, his wife, or he's still holding something back. So I think that's kind of the inkling you get that it could be him.
Either way,
Wait.
I definitely kind of had a feeling. Oh, I real quick though, I do want to talk about probably my favorite character in the whole film. Real quick,
Okay.
there's a particular character I liked a lot because there was something about him that I just could not help but absolutely adore every time he was on screen. And I wonder
Hmm.
if you know who I'm talking about.
I think I do.
All right, you know what, Spencer? Who do you think I'm talking about? Who do you think
I think
absolutely made me giddy every time he was on screen?
Duke Harkonnen, Big
Yes,
Daddy Harkonnen,
yes, I
floating
love
around in his little anti-grav suit.
I loved every second of him being on screen because he was such a bizarre, almost comically cartoony antagonist who was also just a lunatic. And
Yeah,
I got that vibe, and the performance sold it a lot for me too. He just
Oh
seems
yeah.
so giddy and gleeful to get his way. And even that moment where his like right hand dies when Duke Atreus bites into the poison gas like tooth that he was given.
Yeah, and
I like that.
he's dancing around because he's alive, and he didn't know it. He had to have the Beast confirm it for him.
Yeah, there's something so like childlike about his
Oh,
glee and just
to,
absolutely.
to me, he was the most '80s thing in this entire movie,
and I
in a
love
good way.
oh dude.
It was very charming and goofy, and it made me think of a lot of those '80s like over the top, kind of eccentric villains and stuff, like like Khan and Wrath of Khan in Star Trek. And it's like you have these villains who are just way over the top, and it's in the best kind of way. Though you don't really see that anymore. Like most of the time, villains nowadays are all super like they're all dark and serious and stuff, and it's like it's kind of fun to see a villain who's just like he's just an insane psycho who delights in being a psycho, very very clearly delights in being a psycho. And then like
Absolutely.
does he,
He,
so I was
he,
confused a little bit, does he eat
mhm.
people?
He does not. He does not eat people.
I just took it as the fact that he enjoyed watching someone suffer and he was just like reveling in it. That's
Yeah,
kind
that
of the
I
vibe
think
I got.
to this day I still have like this lingering phobia thing with me related to the heart plugs that he would have installed in everybody underneath him. The whole Harkonnen family, all of their servants have those heart plugs. Was that in the version you guys watched
Yeah,
where
Yeah,
yeah,
you
there's
got
yeah,
just
yeah. He like pulled something out and I was like, what was that?
it's
And
a
then
it's a stopper. He pulls that out and there's a little hole in the heart of their servant that when he pulls that little ring out, they just leak. They just spill out and it kills them.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Uh
so that's not what I got from that scene. I got that he was like consuming the dude's life force.
yeah,
Yeah, no, all he does is walk up to that servant boy and pull the drain plug in his heart and watch him bleed out in front of him.
Oh, man.
I will definitely say I don't feel like I can totally understand why Basil was confused because the first time I saw it I was like, what what is happening?
Right.
I
Either way, it scared me.
no,
Oh
he's
yeah.
I'll say despite his like demeanor he is a very like unsettling individual. Like the moment he's introduced, he's unsettling because he's sitting in that chair. His face is just grotesque, and you just see his doctor like poking away at it.
Something I noticed too, by the way, in that scene, all of that warping and distortion on his face, he's dosing with dust. He's trying to become one of those like navigator types.
Oh,
So,
that. Ooh.
so that's what we're seeing is the beginning of that mutation from the dust that he's been consuming. It's supposed to show like that like pocked disgustingness of his skin is also supposed to allude to his privilege. Because he's rich enough to afford all of the dust, and you see him in like a little juice box thing squash a little tiny worm, and then the liquid
that was the other guy. That was
was that a different guy?
Yeah, that was one of the. It was the like. I don't know the character's name. He was the. He was one of the two blonde dudes. He wasn't his son though. It was the other guy.
Oh, it's probably the Beast then.
Yeah, the Beast. Yeah, he's the one that squashes it down and drinks it. I thought.
Mm-hmm.
So
I thought it was the Baron. But either way,
this is not the strangest thing.
They're all redheads, so who knows?
Right. They're all evil.
What? Hold on. What?
Hold up.
Hold up. I don't think that's kosher. I'm gonna have to go check the Brobel.
Oh man, disgusting.
He's definitely one of my favorite villains from movies. Just in the same way that you stated, he's such a repulsive, easy to hate, but you hate that you love him too. Kind of character, because every time he floats around in this little anti-gravity suit, too fat and rich and evil to walk on the ground like a normal person, it just further cements that otherness to him that makes him so weird.
I definitely felt he was probably one of the stronger parts of like the film for me, because every time he was on screen I was like, this is our antagonist and I don't like him, and that's great. Let's talk about something positive that we all agreed on. And that's the music. The main theme of Dune. We hear it a lot in this. Like, do you know what song I'm talking about? There's a particular song that plays a lot, and it's more so in the latter half of the film. That theme is really good. Like,
I believe
really good.
I believe it's called the Prophecy theme, or at least that's the name that I know it of. But I listen to that probably once every week. Like, whenever I need to work on something, I've done homework binges where I put it on for like 3 to 4 hours at a time and just let it play ambiently.
You know what's funny about that theme? It made me think of something, and I couldn't like get it down. And then I remember it's almost exactly, and this isn't like a knock against the theme. This is actually kind of funny how it's influenced things. It's almost exactly the same as the theme in Destiny 2 of the main villain. Like, it's such a random thing to point out, but I was like, I've heard something that sounds like this before, so I looked it up, and it's so similar. I was like, dang, I can see where they got their influence from. But no, it's great.
All I know is it's just good theme. It's really good. Like we mentioned it at the very start that the music is all just, oh, it's so good. I that was one of the biggest things I walked away. I actually talked to my dad because he'd seen Dune before too, and he wanted to know what my opinion was, and I was like, I didn't like it very much. He's like, I'm not surprised, but I'm like, the music is good. And that was still probably one of the biggest takeaways for me is I love the music. Frankly, I probably will end up putting on the Prophecy theme at some point. You're right, by the way, Spencer. That's what it's called. That is exactly what it's. It's catchy. It's appropriate. It's epic, if you will.
Yeah.
I will say, towards the end of the film, if this had been a different movie, if things had been just a little like, if we'd gotten that kind of ideal world where this would have had the proper time,
if this was 3 movies.
I actually felt like I would have loved the conclusion of this film because I actually think it's very interesting and very exciting. It's just too fast and not enough build up.
I think that it was a perfect season finale and not a perfect movie ending.
Yeah. Or trilogy ending, because I think the story of this movie would have worked as 3 movies. Like, I don't I do think it would work best as like a series, but I do think you could do it just in like 3 movies, 3 2.5 hour long movies.
It would be the arrival of Dune, and I did, since I watched the 3 hour version, I kind of mentally kept notes in my head on how the movie was spaced, if it was in very even, 1 hour for interlude and intro, 1 hour for the meat and potatoes, and 1 hour for wrapping it up and going into the prologue. Not at all the case. It was like, gosh, maybe an hour and 40 minutes of what I would consider the intro before you really start getting into the meat of the story.
That actually
Yeah.
sounds pretty accurate even for
Yeah.
our version, like the kind of gist I get.
Yeah, but I think that if you were to break it up into 3 movies, you could absolutely do it, because there's the arrival to Dune and the establishment of the houses, and that would end in the betrayal. There would
Yeah.
be the second one, which is his time establishing himself with the Freemans on Arrakis and learning their ways and kind of developing his mental fortitude, and that would end with him taking the water of life,
Yeah.
some worm juice,
Yeah.
and then it'd be that final climactic, battle scene of him guerrilla warring and freeing Patrick Stewart from the spice mines.
Yeah, I think that would have been like the ideal, probably like 3-stage arc. I think it would have been perfect. I really wanted more time with the Fremens. Notably, the little time we got with them, I was having a good time. I was like, seeing him train them was actually like one of the few moments I was like, I want this to be longer, please.
What did you think of the weapons that amplified the psychic kill word?
I thought they were cool. Super interesting.
Dragonborn much?
Dragonborn Bene Gesserit much?
Yeah, no, that's I kept thinking of Skyrim. I was like, dang. Everything's been done before, huh?
Everything has been done. Say what you will, I thought it was cool. I
liked it. I
This,
just thought, once again, Skyrim would be the ones who copied that, and I'm not saying Skyrim copied that. I'm just saying it's funny that it's been that type of thing where you have a word and then it like creates this psychic blast or whatever. It's been done before, and I thought it was a cool, interesting type of weapon.
I think that kind of sums up like how I felt about Dune as a whole, to be honest. Lots of cool concepts, and I'm like, God, if only this was given the right time of day, this would be
right.
Like,
I was just gonna say that that's really my takeaway for Dune as a whole. As a longtime fan, is it was just very, very ahead of its time and poorly executed.
Yeah.
The concepts in the stories. I mean, it's of the last space in an era where I would say it's the Asimov era of science fiction, where we got things like 2001: A Space Odyssey and I, Robot, the Asimov Foundation trilogy, and then Dune. These were visions of the future from an age long past, and I think we don't really get that idea anymore, because everything is, in our postmodern society, we all satirize and rip these things apart conceptually, but at the time they were groundbreaking.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, I keep using the Lord of the Rings comparison, and I think that's pretty fair because the first book, if I'm corrected, came out in like the 60s. Am I right about that?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Which is not too far from when Lord of the Rings, and they seem to have set the bedrock for a lot of stuff going forward. And like you're saying, like satirized and stuff. Like I recently read the Witcher books, and you compare that to like Lord of the Rings, it's completely satirizing and completely critiquing like the fantasy genre, and not fantasy genre. And I think that's something that like where you see something like this most of the time nowadays, it's critiquing the sci-fi genre or satirizing it. Whereas with this, it's embracing the sci-fi genre to tell a grand story with meaningful themes that we can all relate to. And I think that's kind of a major difference, where it's this matter of nowadays we all have this kind of urge to satirize and critique everything. Whereas like back then, it's like, no, I created this universe in this world, and I'm using it to kind of mirror our own world because it's familiar yet different, and use it as a way to kind of, be like, this kind of stuff can lead to this kind of stuff, and if you don't look out, bad stuff can happen, and if you're not careful, you create this cycle, and people will exploit people, and governments can have too much power, and companies can have too much power, and there's a whole lot about a lot of themes, and I'm speaking of the book more now than the movie, and I think the movie did it a surface level, but decent enough job at capturing some of those themes. I do hope that moving forward. And I think maybe we can kind of switch into talking about a little bit about the new movie. But I hope that the new movie, which I think they've confirmed is a two-parter, so they're gonna have one part then two. So I
Good.
don't know exactly if maybe they'll make each part 3 hours long. That'd give it enough time. But I kind of hope they can kind of capture a little bit more of the themes of the book. And that is something I know Denis Villeneuve is very good at handling themes. I mean, Blade Runner 2049 is it's fantastic at capturing the themes of the first Blade Runner and expanding upon them. For me, Dune 1984 it's very much a product of its time, and it's what I would consider a great attempt. You miss the mark by a little there.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'd say I feel the same way.
All I was going to say is I absolutely feel the same. I mean, as the person who recommended it, coming off of our last episode talking about the thing, I thought this was equal parts the same and different in that the thing did all of its sci-fi storytelling and horror through not showing. Absolutely the monster was horrifying, but the real monster was the suspense and the
Yeah.
dread you felt when it wasn't on screen and you had to think, oh God, oh why, where is it, who is it? That's what's real scary. In Dune, for better or for worse, they don't have a problem with trying to show you exactly how grand and large and magical things are.
Yeah.
And I
They had a ton
appreciate.
of extras.
Oh, dude, hell yeah! All of the battle scenes of the invasion with the bombing runs going off, and I think too the scenes where they would board those little like egg-shaped ships that then went en masse, like by the hundreds, into the cylinder ships. Those things were massive. Those probably were like as big as Rhode Island massive.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think that's a word that I would use to describe the movie as a whole. It tried to be gigantic, and whether or not it was doing anything with any of that space, if it filled itself well, I don't think so. I think that it missed the mark on saturating itself enough.
It is an attempt to create a true space epic, but unfortunately, it was only an attempt and not a actual like successful walkthrough, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like it's definitely an attempt, and you
Yeah.
get that vibe. It's an attempt. There's a lot of moments where I was like, I can tell Lynch is trying, but it's not working.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it. I don't know exactly all the backstory of this, and I think I'm going to read into some of the. There's got to be a lot of interesting behind the scenes stuff regarding this, like with the producers and stuff. I imagine, because I can't imagine that David, like it says, it was written by him, and I can't imagine that his script is what we saw. I would be curious to see what his original script was, like his original adaptation was, because I imagine it was a lot longer, and I imagine that studios immediately were like, no way. Do we want to get into just kind of final thoughts and recommendation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a final arbitrary rating system, I'd say that Dune is strongest in the moments where it is showing you something. It's got a lot to say, and whether or not it says it properly or improperly through dialogue, narration, text, whatever, I don't think that's where it's at its strongest. It's at its strongest when you get to see the scale and the beauty of what they're trying to show. The worms, the world of Arrakis, the dunes, the spice, those gleaming blue eyes of the Freeman. I think that's where Dune is really magical for me, is when they're not cramming exposition down your throat, is where it really says something. The movie as a whole is dated. The effects are dated. The message is just as relevant today, if not even more than why it, when it was made. Overall, I mean, it's, from a contemporary standpoint, not a great movie. I'd still recommend you watch it, just so that you understand a little bit about what Dune is, hopefully it'll attract you enough to read the books and get into it a little harder. You know, take a closer
Mhm.
look.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. For me, I I've heard a lot about this movie before, and I was actually really happy you recommended it because I actually did want to sit down and watch it, especially with the new movie coming out. And I kind of echo a lot of what you said. I think that the message is still there. I think that the movie has a lot of, it is, once again, it's very dated. It has its issues, but there's definitely heart there, and there's definitely something worth seeing, for better or worse. And I definitely would recommend, if you plan on seeing the new movie, I would recommend watching it. And I do think also, like, as a kind of concept, to me, I watched this without I didn't even think I was going to read the books at all. And I watched it, I was like, you know what? I kind of want to read the books now. And so I started reading the book. And I think that's a very good, like, kind of segue into that. I don't think it's the most amazing movie ever made. I don't even think it's the best movie made in 1984, but I do think it's definitely a very interesting piece of history. It's definitely worth sitting down and giving it a chance. And who knows, like, you might like it a lot more than I did. You might hate it a lot more than I did, but I think it's worth giving it a shot.
I'm gonna be the odd man out here. Uh, Here's the thing. I think that this is an incredible proof of concept, and it really did make me want to read the books. Yeah, I feel the same way. I want to know more about this. This universe is interesting. I like the concepts. I like a lot of the actual characters as well. I think there's a lot of meat here. It's hard for me to recommend the film though. I need more than concepts sometimes to want to watch a movie. And like
Hmm.
at this point, I'd say maybe you should read the books first to understand why this is so good, or maybe why those concepts are so intriguing.
Right,
Uh,
especially at the length that this movie is, at its shortest, is 2 hours.
yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
I guess I'm gonna say I can't like recommend it because it is a good movie. Because I think there's a lot here that is like very off-putting to a normal moviegoer. There's a lot of times where I won't lie, I was bored, or I was genuinely confused. But I don't think it's the movie's entire fault. I think it's the fault that this was not given the correct treatment, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna say I don't recommend it, but it's like the weirdest like this is so hard for me to like
Yeah.
give a real like opinion that I don't feel like I can give it justice one way or the other. I'm very split. This is one of the most decidedly complex things I've ever had to like recommend to someone or
Hmm.
potentially anyone because it's like, did I enjoy it? In ways, yes. Did I dislike it? In several ways, yes. Like God,
Like to point out that this movie had a budget of 40 million, and off that budget, it made 37 million.
Hmm.
oof,
So yeah,
So it
that's
did it
it
it did
failed.
lose money.
yes,
Oh, I was gonna say, just to give you an idea, a box office movie, in order to even be considered profitable, has to double its income.
yeah.
It didn't even
Yeah.
equal
Well,
its or
I want to
double
use
its.
this in comparison, and I think one of the biggest issues is you mentioned casting, like just trying to sell it off of star power, and I think that's where most of their money went because in
Yeah.
comparison, the original Star Wars movie cost $7 million to make.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I think that might have been an issue was kind of not putting the money in the right spots, maybe. Not to say that the cast was bad because I actually like the cast, but
I think
sometimes
a lot of the cast really, I don't know, because I'm trying to think about the casting of most of the characters that I liked. Most of the characters that I liked were not like incredibly renowned, famous actors back in 1984. I mean, Patrick Stewart was fine. Sting, it's cool to see him act. Definitely not my favorite characters. Even the main character, oh, I feel so bad for forgetting the actor's name who played
Kyle
Paul
MacLachlan.
Atreides. Kyle MacLachlan. I love Kyle MacLachlan. He's one of my favorite actors of all time. I think they could have picked somebody else for Paul, and they would have done it just as much justice. Like, my favorite character in the entire movie, as far as, like, how they acted and me believing everything they tried to sell me on who that character was, is his dad, Leto.
Mhm.
I think Leto is my favorite, just as, for what he is and what he shows. And that guy's a German actor? I've never seen him before outside that movie.
I don't know. Getting into like that kind of talk of like where their money went, if it relates to the cast or something, I'm not entirely sure. I actually wouldn't be surprised. You also got to consider, Basil, that there's the possibility of there's a lot of this money that may have just been sunk on prototype stuff.
Yeah,
You got to consider
interesting
that.
Fact.
Like, remember,
interesting fact.
What?
David Lynch agreed to direct this without ever reading the book. He didn't ever want to do science fiction. He turned down Return of the Jedi. He didn't know the story and then he worked on the script for 6 months, and then they did 2 drafts of the script, and then they split him and the other writers split over creative differences, and then Lynch worked on 5 more drafts.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's why a lot of this money just kind of evaporated, and it sounds like there was a lot of creative differences, and on top of that, I know for a fact this movie went through a hell of a time trying to be made because apparently they were in talks to get it made right after the books became like a big hit. Like, so they had like I don't want to say 10-year span or something like that, but I recall somewhere someone said it was like a 10-year like thing where they were working on this film to potentially make it happen, and it kept going up and down until eventually like it kind of came around.
I mean, I think that shows. If you were to have told me that before I watched the movie, it would definitely make sense. I can see the scars of many, many rewrites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that about wraps it up. How do you guys feel?
Yeah. I'm still unsure if I want to say I recommend or don't recommend it. I guess I give it a
Right.
I've got one thing to end this off on that I think we can all agree on, though. Dune is an important landmark piece of science fiction, and that regardless of if this film being good or not, it is important.
Yes.
And I think that as a result, people should at least acknowledge that Dune is important and look into it. Even if they decide not to watch the movie or the book, at least come to understand its importance, because I knew its importance before going into this. And I know Basil's heard of it, and Spencer, you've read the books. So we all three understood the importance of what Dune is. Just because this adaptation might not be very good to some, or even most people, it's still an important one, because at least they tried.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, then. I think that wraps it up for this episode of the Commuters. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And next time, I don't remember whose turn it is to recommend something, but I think it's mine. But we shall find out next week or next couple weeks, whenever we get to that. Or who knows, if the world will still exist. Everybody out there, stay safe. Just kind of, do the best you can to take care of yourself and your family.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Stay spicy.